had always believed that weddings were supposed to be moments of joy, the kind of day you tuck into your heart like a pressed flower to be remembered on gray afternoons. My granddaughter Sophia's wedding should have been one of those days. For weeks, I told myself that's how it would be. I wanted nothing more than to see her happy. That morning, I woke earlier than usual, the house quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. I stood in front of my mirror for a long time, smoothing the pale lavender dress I had chosen, the one Henry always said made my eyes look like spring violets. Henry. Even 3 years after cancer took him, I still felt his presence on mornings like this. I dabbed on a touch of the perfume he'd given me for our last anniversary. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear him whisper, "You look beautiful, Margaret." I wanted to look my best for her, for Sophia. The ceremony at St. Augustine's Chapel was everything a grandmother could hope for. Sophia looked radiant as she walked down the aisle on David's arm. My son's face was full of pride, and even Linda, his wife, seemed teary for a moment. Watching them, I felt my heart swell. For those few minutes, the years of strain and distance melted away. If only the day had ended there. The reception was held at the Grand Crest Hotel, a sprawling ballroom decked with white roses and crystal chandeliers. I walked in alone, heels clicking against the marble floor, and made my way to the check-in table where guests were collecting their table assignments and name tags. A young woman behind the table gave me a bright smile as she sifted through a box of cards. "Mrs. Thompson, right? Here you go." I returned her smile as I reached for the card. But when my eyes landed on the elegant calligraphy, my hand froze mid-air. The old lady who pays for everything. For a moment, I thought I must have picked up someone else's tag. But no, there it was. My name printed underneath in smaller letters, as if it were only an afterthought. My cheeks flamed. "There must be some mistake," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. The girl leaned over to look. Her eyes widened. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I can check if there's another one." "No, it's fine." I cut her off quickly. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene at my granddaughter's wedding. "Don't worry about it." I pinned the tag to my dress with trembling fingers and walked into the ballroom. Every step felt heavier than the one before. Inside, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Guests mingled. Waiters glided past with trays of champagne. I tried to hold my head high, telling myself no one would notice. But people notice everything. During the cocktail hour, I caught whispers, little bursts of laughter that seemed to follow me. "Did you see her name tag?" one voice said, low but not low enough. "I heard Linda thought it would be hilarious," another voice replied. "Apparently, she's their personal ATM." I moved away, hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled my drink. That's when I heard my son's voice across the room. "Mom!" David waved me over to a group of well-dressed couples. "Come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." My feet felt like stone, but I forced myself to cross the room. "Mom, this is Bill and Martha Anderson," David said. Then, with a laugh that made my stomach twist, he added, "And here's our walking bank account." Martha's smile faltered. Her eyes flicked down to the name tag on my chest. Bill looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. I extended my hand. "Margaret Thompson, Henry's widow." Bill clasped my hand warmly. "Of course. Henry spoke of you often. He was so proud of you." The conversation continued, but I heard none of it. My ears were roaring like a seashell pressed too tight. When the Andersons finally drifted away, I caught David's sleeve and pulled him aside. "What's the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing to my name tag. David laughed, as if I were a child upset over spilled milk. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one footing the bill for all this since Dad left you everything." "It's humiliating," I said quietly. "Please." He rolled his eyes. "Lighten up. It's a party." Before I could reply, Linda appeared beside him, graceful in her designer gown. "There you are, Margaret," she said with a bright, brittle smile. "Has David been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who made this wonderful celebration possible." She winked. David laughed again. I excused myself and walked as calmly as I could toward the ladies' room. Once inside, I locked the door and pressed a tissue to my eyes. That's when the door opened and an older gentleman in a tailored suit stepped in by mistake. He froze. "Oh, sorry, ma'am." He backed out, then called softly from the hall, "Mrs. Thompson? Margaret? Could I have a word?" I recognized the voice at once. Charles Bennett, Henry's attorney. I straightened my shoulders, wiped my face, and stepped out. Charles gestured toward the tag, his brow furrowing. "May I?" "It's nothing," I said, though my voice cracked. "Apparently it's just a joke." "It's not funny," he said firmly, and Henry would have been furious. Something in his tone made me pause. "There's something you should know," he said, lowering his voice. "Something Henry insisted I keep private unless it ever became necessary." He reached into his inner pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope. "This," he said softly, "is a codicil to Henry's will." My heart pounded as I took it, the elegant handwriting blurring before my eyes. "What does it mean?" I whispered. "It means," Charles said gently, "that any descendant who publicly humiliates you forfeits their share of Henry's fortune. Completely." I stared at him, stunned. "He didn't want you to know," Charles continued. "He hoped they'd treat you with love, not fear." Over his shoulder, through the glass doors, I saw my family laughing, dancing, completely unaware that their behavior had just cost them everything. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I folded the document and handed it back to him. "Nothing, not yet," I said. "I need to see just how far they're willing to go." As I walked back into the ballroom, the name tag no longer felt like a weight of shame. It felt like a warning, a signal that the time for pretending was over. The morning after the wedding, the house felt too quiet. I sat alone at the kitchen table, still in my bathrobe, staring at the little rectangle of cardboard I had brought home with me. The old lady who pays for everything. The elegant script mocked me. I set it down on the table as if it might burn my hand and poured myself a cup of tea. The steam curled upward, vanishing into the still air. When Henry was alive, mornings like this had been full of life. He'd read the newspaper aloud, making wry comments about politics. I'd water the roses in the garden. There had been laughter, easy conversation. Now there was just this silence. My eyes wandered to the mantelpiece in the living room, to the framed portrait taken on our 40th anniversary. Henry, still strong despite the illness creeping up on him, sat proudly in the center. I stood beside him with one hand on his shoulder, and around us, David, Linda, Sophia, and Ethan. We all looked happy, like a family. But that was 5 years ago. When exactly had things changed? The question stayed with me as I carried my tea back to the table and began pulling out an old box from the hall closet. It was full of bank statements and canceled checks. My quiet history of giving. At first, after Henry died, it had seemed innocent enough. A kitchen remodel for David and Linda, a tuition payment here and there, a family trip that I had paid for in full. But looking at the neat stack of paper, the numbers shocked me. Over 3 years, I had given them nearly $250,000. And still, it was never enough. The phone rang. The sharp sound startled me, and I glanced at the screen. Linda. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something inside me said, "Answer it." "Hello?" "Oh, Margaret, finally. I've been calling your cell all morning," Linda said, her tone syrupy sweet. "I must have left it in my purse," I said. "Wasn't the wedding wonderful?" she asked brightly. "Yes," I said. "Sophia looked beautiful." "She did, didn't she? And it wouldn't have been possible without you. We're just so grateful." I closed my eyes, remembering the $45,000 check I'd written for the venue and catering. "I was happy to help," I said evenly. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," Linda said, her voice shifting slightly, the way it always did before a request. "You know, Lucas's parents were supposed to cover the honeymoon, but his father's business has been struggling. Poor things. They've had to back out completely, and Sophia's devastated." I could already see where this was going. "So," Linda continued, "David and I were wondering if you might be able to help. They've got their hearts set on 2 weeks in Bali. We'd contribute, of course, after everything we've spent on the wedding." "Everything you've spent," I corrected silently in my head. Out loud, I said, "I'll think about it." The silence on the other end of the line was thick. "Oh, well, they really need to book soon to get the best rates," Linda said with a little laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. "I understand," I said. "I'll let you know tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat for a long moment staring at the silent phone, then turned back to the piles of paper on the table. Henry had always warned me about David. "He sees money as the solution to everything," he'd said once. But money without values only creates more problems. I hadn't understood then. Maybe I hadn't wanted to. A sudden knock at the door startled me. Through the window, I saw Ethan, my grandson, tall and awkward, shifting from foot to foot on the porch. I swept the papers back into the closet and opened the door. "Grandma," he said, stepping forward to hug me. At 21, he had Henry's height, Henry's kind eyes. "Sweetheart, what a surprise." "I've been texting you," he said. I wanted to make sure you were okay after yesterday." "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound convincing. "Just a little tired. Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where the name tag still lay. He glanced at it and frowned. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for yesterday, for the way everyone was talking." "You noticed?" I asked softly. "Of course I noticed. So did a lot of people. It was awful. I should have said something, but..." I reached across the table and patted his hand. "It's not your responsibility to fix your parents' behavior, Ethan." He shook his head. "But it is my responsibility to say what's right. They've changed, Grandma. Or maybe they were always this way and I just didn't see it before. All they ever talk about now is money. Your money." I studied his face. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then said, "Last week I overheard them talking about your house. Dad said it's too big for one person. They were talking about how to convince you to sell it and move into some retirement community. Something called Sunrise Acres." The kettle on the stove began to whistle, breaking the heavy silence. I poured water over the tea leaves, my mind buzzing louder than the kettle had. They weren't just after my money. They wanted my home. I thought of the garden Henry had planted, of the worn grooves on the porch where he used to sit, of the room where we'd danced slow and clumsy on our last Christmas together. "Grandma?" Ethan's voice was gentle. I set the teapot on the table and sat across from him. "I'm better than okay," I said, surprising even myself. "I think I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in a long time." "What do you mean?" I smiled, a small, steady smile. "Just that it's time for some changes around here." We drank our tea in silence after that, but in my heart something had shifted. For the first time in years, the grief that had held me captive since Henry died loosened its grip. I wasn't powerless. I had choices, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to start making them. 3 days after the wedding, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was an invitation written in Linda's precise handwriting. "Join us for a celebratory post-wedding brunch at the Willowbrook Country Club. Family and close friends only." I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Part of me needed to know, would they continue as if nothing had happened? I arrived that Sunday dressed in a simple cream pantsuit Henry had always loved. I'd chosen it deliberately, quiet elegance. Nothing flashy. The country club's private dining room glittered with sunlight and crystal. White tablecloths, polished silver, the kind of atmosphere where manners were supposed to matter. "Mom, over here!" David's voice rang out the moment I walked in. Linda glided over in a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, air kissing my cheek. "Margaret," she said sweetly, her eyes scanning me up and down, "you look nice." "Thank you," I said, stepping past her to the seat they'd saved for me, at the end of the table, not next to Sophia, but next to Lucas's parents, whom I barely knew. I forced a smile and made polite conversation with them, but my attention drifted constantly to my son and daughter-in-law at the head of the table, presiding as if this were their stage. After plates of quiche and fruit were cleared away, Linda stood tapping a spoon against her glass. "Everyone," she began, smiling broadly, "we just want to thank you for being here today to celebrate our wonderful Sophia and Lucas." There was polite applause. "And of course," she continued, "we have a very special thank you to Grandma Margaret, without whom none of this would have been possible. Her generosity is unmatched, and we're thrilled to announce that Grandma will also be funding Sophia and Lucas's dream honeymoon to Bali." More applause. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I had made no such promise. When I didn't respond, David leaned toward me and said in a stage whisper, "Mom, don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip." Something inside me snapped, like a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long. "I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon in Bali," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went very still. "I believe," I continued, "that Lucas's parents were originally planning to handle that expense." Lucas's father shifted uncomfortably. "There were some business setbacks," he muttered. "I understand," I said kindly. "These things happen, but I think it's inappropriate to volunteer someone else's money without their permission. Don't you?" "You could have heard a pin drop." "Perhaps," I said. "Sophia and Lucas might consider a more modest honeymoon, one within their means." Linda's smile cracked. "Within their means?" she hissed. "What about your means? Everyone knows Henry left you more than comfortable." Something in her tone, the entitlement, the sheer audacity, hardened me. "My financial situation," I said firmly, "is not a topic for public discussion. Neither are my spending choices." David's face flushed crimson. He reached across the table and grabbed my arm. "Mom, stop it," he whispered harshly. "You're embarrassing us." I pulled my arm free. "No, David," I said quietly but clearly, "you've embarrassed yourselves." I rose from my chair. "Sophia, Lucas, I wish you both every happiness. I'd be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, but I'll discuss that with you privately. Goodbye." And with that, I walked out, leaving stunned silence in my wake. That night, as twilight deepened into darkness, I sat at my kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The scene at brunch replayed in my mind over and over. The gasps, the looks, the sudden realization on my son's face that something had changed. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Through the glass, I saw David's car in the driveway. I opened the door before he could knock again. "What the hell was that performance today?" he demanded, pushing past me into the living room. I closed the door behind him, locking it. "You humiliated us in front of everyone," he shouted. "You humiliated yourselves," I said calmly, sinking into Henry's old armchair. "Don't start with that," he snapped. "You've been poisoning Ethan's mind against us. And now you're turning on your own family?" "I haven't poisoned anyone," I said. "I'm simply refusing to be treated like an ATM." "You owe us, Mom. After everything—" "I owe you nothing," I cut him off, my voice steady. Ethan appeared in the doorway then, having come over for dinner earlier. He folded his arms. "Dad, this isn't about money. You and Mom have been using Grandma, and it stops now." David turned on him. "Stay out of this, Ethan. This is between me and your grandmother." "No," I said firmly. "If we're going to talk about this, Ethan stays. I'm tired of private manipulations. Let's put everything on the table." David's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "The only mistake," I said, "was letting this go on for so long." I stood up. "From now on, I make my own financial decisions. If Sophia and Lucas want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save for it like everyone else. If you and Linda want a bigger house, you can work for it. I'm done." David stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "You'll regret this," he said finally, heading for the door. As the door slammed shut behind him, Ethan let out a long breath. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he said quietly, "for not standing up sooner." "You're standing up now," I said, hugging him tightly, "and that's what matters." For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The dam had broken. I would no longer be silent. The morning after the confrontation, I sat at my kitchen table long after the sun had risen, my tea gone cold in front of me. For the first time in years, I felt clear. No fear, no guilt, no hesitation. I picked up the phone and dialed Charles Bennett. "Margaret," he said warmly, "I wondered how long it would take you to call me." "I need to understand everything Henry left behind," I said. "Not just that codicil. Everything. I need to make some decisions." There was a brief pause. "I think this conversation is better had in person," he said. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in the same high-backed leather chair where Henry had once signed his will. Charles placed a folder on the desk between us. "Henry built quite a legacy," he said, opening it. "Several companies sold at the right time, carefully managed investments. He was a cautious man when it came to money. which is why his estate weathered economic storms so well. I knew we were comfortable, I said softly, but I didn't know just how comfortable. Charles finished with a small smile. He flipped through the folder, showing me the assets, the trusts, the properties. The numbers made my head spin. And the codicil? I asked. It's straightforward but powerful, Charles said. Any descendant who humiliates you in a public way, whether at a wedding, in a financial matter, or otherwise, loses their inheritance permanently. And as executor, I've been documenting these incidents carefully. I thought about the wedding, the brunch, the late-night argument in my living room. And what if, I said, I want to make changes of my own will, my own priorities? He leaned forward. What do you have in mind? I told him everything. About Ethan, about the bookstore he dreamed of opening, about the art classes I'd been considering, about the boundaries I wanted to put in place, not as revenge, but as a way to finally live my own life. When I finished, Charles smiled. Henry would have been very proud of you today, Margaret. For the first time since Henry died, I believed him. Leaving the office, I felt 10 pounds lighter. The next few days were a whirlwind of small, deliberate acts of freedom. I signed up for a painting class at the Community Arts Center, a thing I'd wanted to do since college but had always put off. I called my old friend Eleanor, someone I hadn't seen much of since the funeral, and we met for lunch at a little cafe by the river. We talked for 3 hours straight, laughing until our sides ached. I walked through my garden and realized how much I'd neglected it. That afternoon, I bought new gloves and pruning shears. By the time the sun went down, my hands were covered in dirt, my muscles sore, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. A week later, I called Ethan and asked him to come over. He arrived looking puzzled. Is everything okay? Better than okay, I said. Sit down. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had once traced the letters on that awful name tag. You once told me you wanted to open a bookstore, I said. He blinked. I did. You said you didn't think you'd ever have the resources. He nodded cautiously. Yeah, that was just a dream. Bookstores don't exactly make millions. It doesn't have to make millions, I said. It just has to be something that matters, something that brings you joy. He looked at me, uncertain. Why are you bringing this up? I slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside was a check. Grandma, this is an investment, I said firmly. Not a gift. You're going to make a plan, a real plan, and you're going to make this work because I believe in you. He opened the envelope, his hands trembling. I can't take this, he whispered. Yes, you can, I said, covering his hand with mine. Ethan, you've stood by me when no one else would. You've shown me more loyalty and kindness in the past few weeks than some people have in years. I want to see what you can do when someone believes in you. His eyes were shining. I don't know what to say. Say you'll build something good, I said. I will, he said fiercely. I believed him. In the weeks that followed, life began to change in small, almost invisible ways. When Linda's number flashed on my phone, I let it go to voicemail. When David texted about talking over a financial opportunity, I didn't reply. The old Margaret would have been anxious, wondering what emergency she was ignoring. The new Margaret had discovered something miraculous. Silence could be its own form of power. I painted, I gardened. I met with a local accountant to help Ethan sketch out his business plan. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly through the night. 6 months after that brunch, the house felt different. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a sanctuary again. David and Linda, after their attempts to patch things up, went nowhere, had retreated into a chilly distance. Their texts had grown sparse, their voices strained on the rare occasions we spoke. And I was thriving. I was discovering who I was without their constant demands. On my 66th birthday, as I prepared for a small dinner at my house, a dinner Ethan insisted on organizing, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My hair, silver and soft, framed a face that no longer looked weighed down. My new red dress was bold, unapologetic, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. I had no idea that the dinner would turn into a reckoning. The house smelled of rosemary and lemon that evening, the roast chicken slow cooking in the oven. I set out the last of the plates, smoothed the red dress I'd chosen, and took a deep breath. This wasn't just a birthday dinner. It was the first time in months my entire family would be under my roof. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Ethan asked as he carried a platter of hors d'oeuvres to the table. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, glancing around my home. Fresh flowers filled every corner. My new painting, wild, bright colors of a sunrise, hung above the fireplace. This was my house, my life. The doorbell rang precisely at 5 o'clock. David and Linda stood on the porch, smiling in a way that looked like it hurt their faces. "Happy birthday, Mom," David said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. "You look different," Linda said, her eyes scanning the dress, the styled hair, the way I stood straighter now. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping aside to let them in. Not long after, Sophia and Lucas arrived, carrying a covered dish. Then Charles Bennett came with 2 of Henry's old friends. The room filled with conversation and the clink of glasses. For a while, it almost felt like a family gathering should feel. But I saw the way David's eyes roamed the house, as if taking inventory, and the way Linda's gaze lingered on my new painting with faint disapproval. "Did you redecorate?" Linda asked finally. "Just a few changes," I said. "I've been taking painting classes." "Painting classes?" David repeated, his eyebrows raised. "She's really good," Ethan said proudly from across the table. "She even sold a few pieces at the community fair." "Sold?" Linda frowned. "But why would you need to sell them?" "It's not about need," I said, smiling slightly. "It's about joy." There was an awkward pause, broken by Lucas asking Ethan about the bookstore. "It's coming along great," Ethan said. "I've got the business plan finalized and I'm scouting locations. Grandma's been a huge help." David's head snapped up. "With what money?" "My money," I said calmly. David clenched his jaw. "Maybe we should discuss this privately, Mom." "There's nothing private about it," I said. "I'm making my own decisions now." His face flushed, but before he could say more, Sophia chimed in, telling a story about their honeymoon to Cape Cod, the one they'd chosen after my modest check, far from Bali. For a few minutes, the tension eased. After dinner, as coffee and dessert were brought out, Linda cornered me in the kitchen, while the others moved to the living room. "What's going on with you?" she demanded in a low, sharp whisper. "First the wedding, then the brunch, and now this obsession with Ethan's little pipe dream? You've changed." "I've started living my life," I said evenly. "You can't be serious," she scoffed. "David and I have been talking." "It's time you consider moving somewhere more manageable. Sunrise Acres has beautiful apartments. You could sell this house, free up some money. It would be better for everyone." "There it is," I said, turning to face her. "You want my house." "We're trying to help you," Linda said, her voice tight. "No," I said, "this house isn't for sale, and my life isn't up for discussion." Before she could respond, David appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" "Just wonderful," I said, lifting the cake I'd baked that morning. "Shall we have dessert?" We carried the cake into the living room. As I set it down, David cleared his throat. "Before we start," he said loudly, "there's something Linda and I need to discuss with everyone." I froze, my hand on the knife. "We've been worried about Mom's recent decisions," David continued. "The painting classes, the reckless spending, the way she's isolating herself from family. We think it's time to consider a power of attorney arrangement for her own protection." The room fell silent. "That's a serious step, David," Charles said carefully. "Do you have evidence of diminished capacity?" "She's giving away money for a bookstore," David said, as if that alone proved insanity. "And she refuses to consider downsizing. She's not thinking clearly." I set the knife down with deliberate calm. "I am thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said. "What I am not doing is allowing you to control me any longer." "Mom, be reasonable," David said, trying to keep his voice even. "You've always relied on Dad, and then on me, for guidance. You can't suddenly change everything." "I can," I said, my voice strong, "and I have." "You selfish," he started. "Enough," I said, standing. "I've spent 3 years paying for renovations, vacations, cars, a wedding. I've allowed you to treat me like a bank, not a mother. That ends tonight." David's face darkened. "So you're cutting us off? After everything we've done for you?" "You've done nothing for me," I said quietly. "You think you can just—" "David," Charles interrupted, his calm voice slicing through the chaos. "Sit down. There's something you need to hear." David turned on him. "This isn't your business." "It is," Charles said firmly. "Your father anticipated this very situation. He left a codicil to his will, and as executor, it's my duty to uphold it." David stopped, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The codicil states," Charles said, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket, "that any descendant who publicly humiliates Margaret or attempts to coerce her against her wishes forfeits their entire inheritance. Permanently." The room went silent. "That's ridiculous," Linda burst out. "It is legally binding," Charles said, "and I've been documenting the incidents, the wedding name tag, the brunch announcement, and tonight's attempt to strip your mother of her autonomy." David went pale. "Margaret," Charles said, turning to me, "do you wish to enforce the codicil?" I looked at my son, at the anger, the greed, the entitlement, at Linda's pinched expression, at Sophia, who sat pale and silent, and Ethan standing steady beside me. "Yes," I said, "I do." The words hung in the air like the crack of a gavel. "You can't be serious," David said, his voice trembling. "I have never been more serious," I said. "All of it?" Linda whispered. "All of it," Charles confirmed. "Their shares will be redistributed to Margaret and to the descendants who have treated her with respect." Ethan's eyes widened, shocked. "This isn't fair," David shouted. "She tricked us." "No, David," I said quietly. "You tricked yourself. You chose this path." I turned to Ethan and Sophia. "You two have shown me kindness. You will inherit what's left, not because of money, but because you understand what family means. And with that, I finally felt free. The room after my words was still, as though the air itself had been drawn out of it. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then David stood up so fast that his chair clattered to the floor. "This is a setup," he spat. "A trap. You can't do this, Mom." "You're welcome to try contesting it," Charles said calmly, sliding the envelope back into his jacket. "But Henry's codicil is airtight. You've crossed every line he warned about." Linda grabbed David's arm. "Let's go," she hissed, her face pale. "This isn't over." David threw over his shoulder as they stalked out, the front door slamming behind them. The house fell quiet, broken only by the sound of the door swinging back into place. After they left, I found myself standing very still, my hands pressed to the back of a chair. Sophia was the first to speak. "Grandma," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. For the wedding. For not saying something sooner." I crossed to her and cupped her face gently. "Sweetheart, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward." Lucas put an arm around her shoulders. "We want to do better," he said simply. "I know," I said, "and you will." Later, after everyone else had gone, Ethan stayed behind to help clear the plates. "You okay?" he asked softly as we carried dishes into the kitchen. "I'm better than okay," I said, surprising even myself. We stacked the last plate, and I turned to him. "You know," I said, "for the first time since your grandfather died, I feel free." Ethan smiled. "You deserve that, Grandma." In the months that followed, the effects of that night rippled outward. David and Linda made several attempts to challenge the codicil, but their lawyers told them the same thing Charles had. There was no case. They eventually sold their house, packed their belongings, and moved to Florida, where David took a job with an old business associate. Our communication dwindled to polite holiday cards and the occasional strained email. And for the first time in years, my phone stopped ringing with constant demands. Sophia, meanwhile, began to visit me more often. She came alone sometimes, and sometimes with Lucas. We cooked together, laughed, planted tulips in the garden in the spring. And when she told me she was expecting, she cried as she asked if she could name the baby after Henry. Ethan threw himself into the Bookstore project, and I threw myself into helping him. We found an old Victorian house on a quiet street downtown, a little worn, but with tall windows that let in the light. Every week I watched as it transformed. The creaking floors were polished, the walls painted warm colors. Shelves were built from reclaimed wood. In the back, a cozy corner for coffee and pastries appeared. Upstairs, a small apartment was turned into a writer's residence, a haven for young authors who couldn't afford their own space. The day the sign went up, Chapter 1. I stood on the sidewalk with Ethan, tears in my eyes. "You did this," I said. "We did this," he corrected, putting his arm around me. On opening day, the bookstore was crowded. People streamed in, eager to browse the shelves. A mural of a whimsical forest covered the children's section wall, a painting I had done myself, filled with tiny hidden animals for kids to find. "Grandma, look," Ethan whispered, pointing at a little girl crouched by the wall, tracing the painted trees with her finger, smiling. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, not just in what we'd built, but in what we'd chosen to be. 1 year later, the store had become a hub for the neighborhood. Twice a week, I led story time for children, and on quiet afternoons, I painted in the sunlit upstairs room. Sophia came in one day pushing a stroller. "Hi, Grandma," she said, smiling. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I just came to drop off some new bookmarks," I said, bending to peek at the baby. "Hello, little Roberta." The baby gurgled, her tiny fists waving in the air. "Named after Grandpa Henry," Sophia said softly. I kissed the baby's forehead, feeling a rush of love and something like peace. Later that afternoon, Ethan joined us at a table by the window, a notebook in his hand. "I've been thinking about expanding our programs," he said, his eyes bright. "Adult literacy tutoring, creative writing workshops for teens. It would mean reinvesting some of the profits, but I think it's wonderful," I said before he could finish. "You really think so?" "I do," I said. "This place isn't just a store anymore. It's a place where people come to learn, to dream. That matters." Sophia smiled at me, and I saw in her expression a quiet understanding that hadn't been there a year ago. As the three of us talked, I glanced around the bookstore. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting everything in gold. Children laughed in the corner. Someone ordered a cappuccino at the counter. It was a picture of a future I hadn't imagined for myself a year ago, back when I thought my world revolved around the approval of a son who had never really seen me. I had lost something that night at my birthday dinner, yes, but I had gained something far more valuable, a life that was finally, fully my own. I left the store that evening with a bag full of books and my heart full of gratitude. Walking home, I paused at a corner, looking up at the sky streaked with pink and gold. For a long time, I had been the old lady who paid for everything. Now I was something else entirely, a woman who had learned at last the true value of herself. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.